Good morning. We're here because we're a part of the parenting conversations that Crosspointe is doing, and the conversation that was brought to us is why is it important to talk about race with your children? But first, we want to say that we're not experts on this topic. We're just parents who try to have these conversations with our kids, and so we just want to give you our perspective on how that's just worked practically in our own families, and maybe that's helpful for you. And then we also will offer some resources for maybe some experts that you can look at on your own. So I guess let's introduce ourselves. I'm Tirzah, and I'm a community pastor at Crosspointe, and I have kids, a 14-year-old daughter in the 8th grade, and a 7th grader, and a 10-year-old boy in the 5th grade. So
I'm Kim, and I am a parent and a new member of Crosspointe. And I have a 17-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, and an 8-year-old son.
I'm Tisha, and I have a 12-year-old son, an 11-year-old son, and an 8-year-old daughter.
Awesome. All right, so now we have to ask the hard question of why is it important to talk to your kids about race? Does anybody want to start it off?
I think for me, I want to raise anti-racist children. And I think that in doing so, we have to have these conversations so they understand what racism is and how to be disruptors of racism. I think it's important for them to have an understanding about the world around them and empathy for other people, and how to value and embrace people for who they are. So,
for me, my kids, being black kids growing up in a pretty white area, or a non-black area, it's important so that they're aware of what they may experience around them. And so I know that we've had conversations probably from when they were a lot smaller than maybe some other families might introduce race, just because it's very evident. It's what they might experience every day as young children, or what they see us experience as parents.
I think most families, especially maybe in this area that's suburban, is that we just have grown up in families that don't talk about race at all. And that means that maybe we've grown up in families that think that we've talked about racism, or we've thought, well, if we don't talk about it, then it means equality. And I think that's just not true. Not talking about racism, not talking about race is actually just a culture of silence, and it means that your kids never learn about that. And it's kids learn from us. So what they're learning is either by not talking about it, by being silent about it in our homes, that racism isn't a problem, or that we don't care enough to do anything about it, or that everybody else is wrong that's telling us that there's a racism in our society. And so I think as white parents, we have to explicitly talk about it, and be really intentional about talking about it, because if we don't, anti-racism conversations are not just going to come up. The earlier we can talk about it, the more natural it becomes talking about it. And so it's never too early to talk about it. So if we don't talk about it, if we don't start talking about it, we're just going to raise another generation that has absolutely no idea about racist issues in the world.
right,
So we have an opportunity now with our kids.
right.
Yeah, my 17-year-old is a senior in high school, and she has brought her experiences into her school, and tried to make her peers aware of just being conscious of race and their feelings, or how they've approached it. And she created a project there just to bring it to the forefront. And she said she's been really surprised by some of her peers, a lot of her white peers, who have really come to this project just like, wow, this is something I didn't realize before. And so now it makes them think about it. And so for her in that age group, it's talked about all the time, I think. And then as we go younger, I think definitely with my 12-year-old, but then also my 8-year-old, who's not really experiencing too much, but it's evident there too. And so I think it's worth it to have those conversations, even as the younger kids.
I think what's interesting is that your daughter is sharing this in high school, and some of these kids are not, this is the first time they're hearing this. And we know that babies as young as 6 months old start to notice differences in skin tone. And I think the statistic is by 4, they've developed racial biases already. And imagine if those students had learned and heard all of this since they were little. You know, they've gone through now elementary, middle, and high school carrying these biases and carrying these stereotypes. And if we can start talking to children much younger, I think things will look a lot different in a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we do that? And how have you all done that in your families? Started talking about it.
For us, you know, let's say there was an incident that happened, even so the big incidents that the whole world knows about, of course, but then even little incidents that happen to us in our small family, and then with family members, it's a topic, you know, we might have to say, look, this is what happened. This was said to our family member, and this is why it was said, and the kids, you know, might say, well, you know, that doesn't make any sense. And so then we have to explain. The same thing that happened when I was young, having to realize that I wasn't the same as my white friends, and I couldn't do the same things, and I couldn't navigate the world the same way. Then my parents just had to say, this is how it is, and so this is how we're going to navigate it. So we had to talk about it just so I could be aware, just like we do with our kids now, making them aware so that they don't go through or go to school or go through the world thinking that something is wrong with them, thinking that it's okay for certain things to be said. And so just we've had to maybe have these conversations at times that are uncomfortable but necessary. It was necessary to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one thing we've tried to do is have, even at young ages, diverse books, diverse toys, just so they see that. And we try to make sure we are out in the community and involved with a diverse, you know, group of people, and so they also see that we value diversity, and I think for us the conversation is different too, and we've told our kids, yep, are we going to face racism? Probably. Here are some things you might experience. Here's how we can handle that. But we're not going to have the same experiences as our Black friends or Latinx friends. And we've had to talk to them about being model minorities and what our role is in that, and how we as model minorities will be discriminated against in some ways, but we also can be disruptors of racism. And I think it's important for families to tell their children, your job is not to save people, or save others, but we can disrupt what's happening, and we can change what's happening. And I think guiding those discussions.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of asking questions first before we delve into the list of to-dos or this, you know, information, and try to understand where your kids are and where they're coming from and how they see the world first. I think helps guide the conversation even at younger ages.
Yeah, I love what you said. I mean, even for young kids, starting that conversation can be difficult, but I think for white families, it's decentralizing whiteness. So it's really easy to turn on the TV, to go to the library, to all of the things, and white characters are the heroes, and you can live in that world without even realizing that you're doing it. And so as parents, as white parents particularly, you have to be really intentional about that, and it's work on you and educating yourself in order to have those conversations, and just being really honest, and I think not parenting in fear, and not being afraid to address those really hard issues. And that doesn't mean that you're showing, you know, explicit videos to your kids when they're not ready to see that, but you are having conversation about what happened, and why it happens. And I think, having the books out and asking those questions. Well, what do you think about that? Why do you think that happened? How would that be different? How would you have done that differently? Was that fair? All of those questions are things that kids can answer and talk about, to each other.
You mentioned characters and shows and decentralizing whiteness. On my senior's one of the college application questions, she's got all the serious answers and everything, and one of the questions was name a protagonist that you identify with or something. And she said, do you think it's going to be do you think I'm not going to get in if I say that it was Raven Baxter from That's So Raven? And I was like, no. She said, I could pick a book, I could pick somebody that everybody's going to pick, but that's not going to be true. And when she explained it, she said, when I was growing up, Raven was the only positive black female role model, and she was independent and strong, and she put that down, and she said, this is the protagonist that I identify with. And I thought it was a good answer, and very telling too, because there are so many other choices out there that white kids can identify with, and black children are often left with this very narrow field, and I don't think that other people, you don't really think about it, but so it's important. Representation matters, and I think the more that we get other minorities in places that are visible to everyone, then this question of race maybe gets we don't have so much of a question of race anymore. That's the goal anyway. But we're not there yet, and we have to, have Raven Baxter as our as our hero.
But that's so central. That's Disney Channel.
Yeah.
Every kid is watching that, so that should be something. And it's getting a little bit easier, but not really. Not as easy as it should. And it's easier for parents as you're scrolling through Disney Plus. We should be suggesting those shows.
Right.
We should be saying, well, let's watch this and let's talk about it. How are families different? We already have had those conversations forever. There's a mom and a dad. There's just a mom. There's two moms. Those are conversations that we've been learning to have. So we can learn to have these conversations too, so that by the time you get to high school and you're filling out those forms, or you're making a project, other kids aren't surprised by it.
Right.
It shouldn't be. It should have already happened by the time we get there.
I think something else that you had brought up that I just think is so important before having these conversations, or throughout life, I guess, but is, I think as parents, we need to really recognize our own biases and really do some reflection, even prior to having these conversations, and then through the conversations, acknowledging those, because I think that's crucial for us to know our biases before we even really engage these conversations. And also being able to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let's find out more. I don't know about that. Let's look into that. And being okay with just having the conversation, knowing that you're not going to have all the answers, and being honest with your children that it's okay not to know all the answers, but what we're going to do is learn, and we're going to listen. So I think that those are good places to start when you start to have these conversations.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking about, you made me think of, so you want to talk about race, that book, that simple kind of a how-to book, because we were talking earlier about, well, what do you do if it's like a preschooler, right, that comes home, and we use the example, comes home and has touched somebody's hair, which is inappropriate. Preschooler doesn't really know or understand, is probably curious, and you don't want to shame your kid into that, right, into not doing something, but at the same time, they need to know that's not what we do. And so how do you have those conversations if you don't know, well, why is that not okay? If I don't understand it, then I can't explain that to my younger kid, of acknowledging the difference, that celebrating, you've noticed that there was a difference, and that's great, and that's exciting, but next time, this is not what we do, that kind of stuff. But again, like you said, if we don't know, we can't explain it.
Right.
Yeah.
Another, I think, topic that's important to bring up in this conversation is that just reminded me of is work. You know, when you have children who are neurodiverse, it can also shape the conversation in a different way. I have a student that I work with that his mom emailed me 2 days ago and said, "Hey, we went to church for the first time in forever, and my son said, 'There's my brown friend.'" And he ran up to his friend and he was like, "My brown friend." And the boy looked at him and was clearly unhappy with what was said and walked away. And this is one of his very close friends he hasn't seen because of the pandemic. He didn't recognize that was offensive, that why his friend walked away. He didn't understand all of that. So I think too, it's important. I think sometimes people shy away from having those conversations with kids who are neurodiverse. And so if you do have a child who's neurodiverse, it is just as important to have these conversations with them. So that your preschool example reminded me of that. And I think that sometimes we kind of forget to address that too.
Yeah.
And if you don't catch that in preschool, then as my 12-year-old has experienced, she's like, "Everybody likes to touch my ponytail." And so we've talked about that, and, you know, she's got to deal with that and let them know. And I think she has, but she's very shy. So, but then just it's the education, because I think they just love seeing the curls and they want to touch. But, I mean, having those conversations at home with the kids who may be doing the touching would be helpful. And I'm assuming that, I mean, there are adults who don't realize that. So I guess we have to start there. And it's well-intentioned, but also asking where is this, because kind of what's sourcing this and where is it coming from, and why do we feel like, oh, because it's different and we need to, you know, it's out there. And I think other people just want to be not othered anymore, and they want to be brought into the main group. So
That reminds me too, I think it's important when we have our conversations with our children to say, you know, this isn't all black people feel this way or all Indian people feel this way. But we often use words like some or many or often, and I think language is really important. I remember when I was a kid and people will say like, "Oh, are you going to wear your Indian costume to X, Y, and Z?" Well, it's not a costume, you know. Or, "Oh, we eat normal food at our house," or on this menu, this is normal food, meaning American food. Or so I think that the language we use, our kids are really picking up on and listening. And I think that we also don't want to make it some exotic, you know, thing to have to be black or to be Indian or to be, you know, Asian, you know, and I think that happens a lot. So I think there's a balance of embracing and valuing the beauty of diversity without making it something really exotic, and that can be very othering for people in those communities as well. And I think even more than what we say, our kids are watching what we do and how we interact with people and how we are showing our values through the activities we choose, the people we surround ourselves with.